born in 1939.
That's right.
So, very interesting year because the Second World War
Just
had
before
begun.
the war, I'm born.
So, when we are going through your films,
Yes.
we are getting the politics,
Yeah.
we are getting the sense of history,
Yeah.
and your film is completely a weapon, is a
Right.
political weapon,
Yeah.
is a historical weapon to understand the
Right.
world scenario. Throughout the years, you are going through the Second World War.
Yeah.
How is your, how you were brought up in that making?
Well, of course, if I look back at my films, I realize more than half of 30 films, at least 15 or maybe more, are more or less about the Second World War and the consequences. So, meaning I was completely determined by my birthday, which I could not choose.
Not choose.
And therefore, the films I made, I could not choose either. The films choose me. And but that only dooms later when you start filmmaking. You know, you want to impress the audience. You want to be recognized as a person and as an artist. And you're not really aware that history is speaking through your mouth. You think it's all me. It's all ego. No. So when I choose the Young Turles as my first film, it was really the experience of having just spent 3 years in boarding school, and the relationship between boys, and where there's always a homosexual component, but there's always a power struggle. It's like with young dogs, you know, everybody wants to be the number one and to impose. So it was that experience. I was 25, so I was just not even 7 years out of boarding school. It was the only real experience of life until then. But there was, of course, like a political dimension to the film, which was conscious on my part, which was that it could be read like a metaphor of engagement and commitment, and how in a society you cannot stay just like an outside observer, but that you have to partake in civil life, because if you don't, then others will decide for you, and you may find yourself under a dictatorship, and even under a very negative, not an enlightened one. But I mean, I don't think that is really the true motivation. Must have been the personal experience. It's like what Henry James says: a good novel has to be on life lived, and I think the only life lived I had until then, except for childhood, but the only conscious life I had till then was the boarding school experience and the being together.
I can connect it in the film. Last I have seen your film, The Come at Sea.
Yes.
And there is Paris, that there is a ghetto, and
yes.
The people, the young people in the Defiance, and they are making the sports and the relationship with the gods.
Yes.
See, you are there.
And it is
1941.
Yeah, 1941. And I came upon this story because our my boarding school in France was just next to this place, Chateaubriand, where it all happened. And one of my classmates was the son of a dentist, and in front of their house the German officer is shot at the beginning. So there was even
three young communists.
But when we were 14, 15, 16 years old, we did not talk about the Second World War or so. But somehow it must have been present that when I later read about this story, I thought, but this is for me, I have to tell this story. Actually, it's one of the very few original screenplays I wrote.
When you were coming to cinema, I wrote Louis Malle, and you are a very good friend of Tavernier also.
Yes,
Mr. Tavernier, I have met him. There is an international film festival in India, in Goa, every year. It's a central government.
Yeah.
There is a retrospective
of Tavernier. That's the luxury festival. And Kolkata is the real world festival.
Right. So that time he was in Goa, and I introduced myself to. And regarding Mrinal, he told Mrinal Sen is very thick and thin to me, etc.
Yes.
So if you can tell me some your. So you are assist also the Alain René's film. So first time when you are going to make your films. Before that, when you are in them and working with them, so not in the making of cinema, but also the thinking process of their filmmaking.
It was an interesting moment when I wanted to do my first film, and of course I thought of making a French film. My friends Tavernier and Louis Malle, and they said, no, we got enough directors in France. You go back to Germany and make a German film. We don't know anything. There is no German cinema. We don't know anything about your country. That would be much better. Now started to make films about German problems, about German literature, about German people. And so that was very good because I always had a little bit the look of an outsider or of a revenant. My way of working on the set or so is completely influenced by the way I saw my French masters work, there is you always have a personal side you cannot control that is given to you by birth, you know. But there's also culture, of course. And in that sense, I was very much influenced by the French. Now, Bertrand Tavernier and me, we went to the same boarding school, so we made the same experiences. Yes, Henri IV in Paris, and with the difference, I was intern, meaning I was in the dormitory and living in the school, and he was extern, meaning he went home for the night, you know, and came back just for the classes. So he was my relationship to the outside world, and we went to see the same movies and heard the same concerts and went to the same theater place. We were curious in the same direction. That is an influence. Other than that, of course.
But you were starting the movement, not you, so you and your friends, the New German cinema in 60s. That time you were very young, very young. And so
everybody was so young at the time.
But that time there is the New Wave movement.
New Wave,
there. And New German cinema, New Wave cinemas, parallel going on movement.
I lived the French Nouvelle Vague. I mean, I was there when it started in 58, 59. The first short films of Truffaut, the first short film of Godard. And so. And then when I came back to Germany in 1965, I discovered that there was a new German wave starting. I met Alexander Kluge immediately. He had an apartment which he rented out, so that's where I lived at Alexander Kluge in his furniture. Ugly, very ugly. The first young filmmaker I met was Werner Herzog, who had just done a first short film.
Short film.
And he was actually editing in the cutting room of Leni Riefenstahl,
Oof.
who rented out her. And I told him that I want to shoot young Turles, and that I was looking for a special landscape and a special type of village, you know, very 19th century. And he said, I have the exact place for you. I was in May in Cannes, and he was in September in Venice. And a year later, Werner Herzog had his first film. That was, I should say, the kind of the starting of it all, yeah.
And then how it is growing up, and you are being there as a new German cinema. You can, if you wish to tell about the movement.
Even more than me, those who stayed in Germany had the feeling that the wrong films were being made around them. Because these films gave, represented a fake reality. Let's say it was a bit like Bollywood cinema. By the way, there were also musicals, but there were melodramas or like telenovelas and so. And it was all the spirit of Heimat, which means my country, you know, but in a very regressive way. And so they revolted against this type of filmmaking and say, but we want to make a movie that shows our country the way it is today, you know, and our generation the way we are. This impulse, of course, for me when I came from France was very similar. I wanted to discover what is this generation of Germans? You know, what do they think? I had lost contact. I was gone for 8-9 years, you know, a long time when you grow up. I had left when I was 16 and I came back, I was 25.
25.
So you, and I think the whole young, so-called young German cinema was to explore the reality we are living in. Not so much who are we, but what is this society we are living in, and very strongly questioning this society, because it was a society that pretended that, like, the Second War had never happened. They were all, let's think forward, we got to move forward, there's no use to deal with the past. But when you are 15, 16 years old, you want to know what was the past. And what was, and who were our parents. And that was really the dynamic of the films.
And after you and Kluge and Herzog, after that, in your movement, von Trotta came, and Fassbinder was there.
Yes.
Rainer Hoff is there or not?
Oh yes, yes. Absolutely. I mean, I met. It's almost the same year, '69. I met at the same time Fassbinder and Margarete von Trotta. When casting a film which I made called Baal, and I was looking for the main actor and for the main actress, and I saw Fassbinder and hired him, and I saw Trotta, and so
very interesting.
and the next film I made called The Sudden Fortune of the Poor People of Gamba, again in casting, I looked for people who were from a certain part of Germany because they had to speak a certain dialect. And I found out that Reinhard Hauff was from the same part as I was from, where this dialect, Hessia, where this dialect was spoken. And I convinced him to be an actor. Actually, in the film, he was Margarete von Trotta's husband. So you see, it's a very incestuous affair. We were in a small town, Munich, you know, not even 1 million inhabitants. We were a few dozen of film buffs, and everybody influenced each other, and everybody knew each other, and there were of course jealousies and competition, but there was also solidarity.
It's your solidarity, and in the philosophic or cultural or psychological or literary, in all respect, do you have not swayed, influenced by the Marxism and the leftism? It's very important
yes,
to us.
No. It's a very important
question.
question. I was twice influenced very strongly. The first time was when I was still in boarding school in France. There was the Algerian War, which was the war of independence for Algeria. When I came from Germany to France, and
Algeria's
there was I arrived there at the school, and there were a few Muslims they were Moroccans, and I befriended them, and they told me, you know, about a bit about the Arab world and all that. And at the same time was the beginning of the war for independence of Algeria. And this war was of independence was of course very much supported by the communist parties and the communist world, and also in France of the Communist Party. Now, I thought a communist is kind of a monster with a knife in his mouth, you know. That is the way in West Germany it was represented. They were the ones who cut our country in half. They were the ones who oppressed East Germany. So the Communist Party was prohibited in Germany, total interdiction. If you were a communist, you went to jail, you know. And here I saw very normal people being communists. Even our Jesuit priests had leanings towards communism, and certainly the independence movie against colonialism. So that is where I first was introduced to Marxism in a very practical way. As a sympathizer already then, tried to help the independence movie. I distributed leaflets, which was illegal in the French school because it was. Then I made, in 1960, I made a first short film about independent fighters who deserted the French army and came to Frankfurt in Germany, which was immediately forbidden both by the German censorship because it criticized a friendly nation, and in France forbidden because it criticized the colonial fight. So I was, whether I choose or not, I was in the middle of the Marxist ideology. And then I went to, after the baccalaureate, I went to the university in Paris in France, and there I had some teachers who were communists. So I was what I had done by instinct before, and just out of impatience, young adolescent, impatient, you know, sustained the poor struggle of the oppressed, all of a sudden became a theoretical thing, and that's when I started to study a bit of Marxism and studied economics and politics. So that was Marxism, whether you want it or not. And that was really my introduction to it. I couldn't help to make the connection to the aesthetics, because then you would wonder what would Marxist cinema be, what would Marxist aesthetics be, and so we discovered Bertolt Brecht. And tried to bring all that together. And
in your TV film also.
it was, of course, it was in complete opposition to everything that was valid in German culture at that time. But a couple of years later, the 65, I shot The Young Turtle. 66, it came out. 2 years later was 68, was the student movement, the political movement, and Rudi Dutschke and all that. So that was the logic continuation. But let's say the influence of Marxism on me was a French product again. I discovered him, care of France and of the colonial struggle, and for many years it lasted. Yeah.
You made these films going on Southern People of Poor and Teen Drum. So you were going to pass the after the aura of Nazism and the psyche of Nazism. I think so. Teen Drum is very important. So the boy has not been grown up, and he so very is a perversity of the Nazism is there also. So and relationship, etc., etc.
Through this film, I think for the first time also I questioned Marxism through the meeting with Günter Grass. We had before that I had worked with Heinrich Böll, who was still very leftist in a sort of Christian Marxist way. And with Günter Grass, I really came to understand more what had happened in Germany when the Nazis came to power, and how it was the failure that Marxism and socialism at the time came together. They were fighting each other, and the National Socialists took advantage of it. And imposed themselves and got rid of all that, so that this class struggle of Marx, of the proletariat against the bourgeoisie, I started to question the validity of that, because what had happened in Germany, it was the lower middle class against the proletarians and against the upper middle class. It was really the revolt of a class that did not really exist in Marx, which was neglected by everybody, and who all of a sudden came over, because in a very demagogic way, people took advantage of it. And that is the first time I really questioned the Marxism. The second time was when the wall came down. In 89, so that was another 10 years later. And I came to the former East Germany to take over there. Was in charge of the old studios and so on. And there was 710 people whose boss I was, employees who were all the product of the so-called socialist society, which had utterly failed, because not only it destroyed the economy and the environment and the cities, but it destroyed the people. I had that feeling, that the people's backbone was broken in that system, and all the wonderful socialist planification of the economy didn't work at all. It did not produce more equality. It produced bureaucracy and
state socialism and orthodoxy of state socialism. So
ever since, the the Marxist theory is still one of the most beautiful construction of a worldview, but it's entirely theoretical, and the reality, unfortunately, is different.
Different.
And certainly the recipes people tried to take out of Marxism mostly failed. I don't know how that is reflected in my filmmaking, but consciously maybe not. But it certainly is. It's been a long way. Yeah.
And 91, the fall of Soviet Russia is also there, and after 89, 91.
Yeah.
And the last decade, we know the fall of Soviet Russia and the East European, including your East Germany and Poland, Hungary, etc., etc. So the state socialism and the orthodoxy of the state socialism and the power crazy socialists are gone.
Yeah.
But now new decade. I just want to know because the Kametsi, you are making this film just some 2 or 3 years back. I think so. It's in 2017 or 16. Kametsi. So I just want to know from you the new millennium, last 2 decades, there is some sort of right-wing wave. The second decade of the new millennium, you made the film Kametsi. So again, you are going to the past in 1941, and what atrocity by the Nazism. You should find out the 3 communists who killed the German officer. Otherwise, I will kill your people regularly. The theme of this film. So, what is your attitude to this global politics and the way we are going to regularly?
It is very curious to see, as you pointed out, that these neo-patriotic or neo-fascist or anyhow demagogic movements happen in so many places all over the world, probably for different reasons in each case, but simultaneously. I do not understand it. 10 years ago or so, the French anthropologue Claude Lévi-Strauss said that he has the feeling, he was already 100 years old when he said that, or 95. He has the feeling that history is moving in kind of underground movements by waves. And the same as nobody could ever explain why in '68 it happened at the same time in Berkeley, in Tokyo, in Berlin, and where not, these student revolts, and probably in India too. And now all of a sudden in very different countries you have these same things coming up. He said, I have no scientific explanation for it, but by observing what's happening, I see there are these movements that like the pendulum goes one way and it comes back in another way. And then we seek salvation in ideology. It doesn't work. It comes back. Then we go to an anti-ideologic thing, which is even worse. So this questions the notion of continuous progress in humanity. And that may be too much taken from Western philosophy, that we think it is always getting better and further and faster and more just and so on. But that in fact the development of human society is not determined by this kind of idea of progress. I sometimes have the feeling it's more like evolution. There is an accident somewhere in one gene, and it provokes a mutation, and this mutation conducts to all of a sudden another thing, and that in this way mankind on the planet is changing all the time, but there is not a direction towards progress. There is certainly a direction towards more and more and more demographic, which is in science you do have progress. Say in medicine you have progress, which conducts to progress in demography. But then demography we should be able to control. I mean, all this to say that it is more complicated than the Marxist theory seemed to say. And unfortunately, there is no coherent theory right now to explain the evolution of human civilization, unless you are religious. But that's a belief. That is not a theory.
Can you tell regarding our Indian chapter of Indian cinema? We have the important directors. Ray is there, Satyajit Ray, Mrinal Sen, Ritik Ghatak. I know you know the Adur Gopal Krishnan. It's a very important director in South. Fortunately, the giant three directors, Ray, Sen and Ghatak, it's from Bengal. I'm Bengali.
I know.
But Adur Gopal Krishnan is there. So many other Shyam Benegal is there, and the Girish Kasraval is there in Karnataka, in Maharashtra. So how you can connect your sense of history, sense of politics, sense of culture, and sense of filmmaking also? Is there any connection with the Indian cinema? How do you like the Indian cinema or Indian chapter of our whole world filmmaking? So how do you place it?
I was always looking for other ways of storytelling. The central, I would say, Central European way of storytelling, which was based more or less on the theater of the 19th century, Ibsen or Howard or the comedies, and that was then exported to Hollywood largely, which is always like the
Central European means
5 act
police and
plays.
Hungarian.
So it is always like exposition. Then there is a conflict. Then there is a climax. Then there is maybe a redemption of the character, and then there is a catharsis and a resolution. I think the Nouvelle Vague first questioned this dramatic structure, because Godard said, of course, every movie has to have a beginning, a middle, and an end, but not necessarily in that order.
All order, right.
Which I think is the best way to question this pattern, which you have in every TV series today, which worldwide seems to impose itself, that this is the way to tell a story. And it is not true in real life. In real life, things do not happen in 3 acts. And I don't think there is ever redemption. There may be several climaxes. There is very seldom catharsis. And so I'm curious, how do other cultures deal with it? And this is where, for me, Indian cinema comes in. When I first discovered it not at all through an Indian film, but through Ivory,
James Ivory.
Shakespeare Walla.
James Ivory.
I think that was the first time I was aware of India in cinema. And it was soon followed at the Cinémathèque in Paris by Satyajit Ray's films, the old ones. And then came the new ones at the Berlin Film Festival, and then came Mrinal Sen's films and so on. The first time I was really struck by it was in the trilogy about Apu. And that growing up in the countryside, in the village, and to observe the different people around in a family, but also the animals and the plants and the seasons in the nature. I felt that is a richer view of how to represent human life than our, you know, based on drama. And then Mrinal Sen's film came to it, and they, while keeping the sensuality, but he introduced a kind of a revolutionary element to it. You could say that Satyajit Ray is, in the best sense, conservative. I don't know, but that's the way I felt it. Whereas in Mrinal, you had this element of revolt. As a, and I like that because I think revolt. Then I look at my own films, and a lot of times the main character is someone who is revolting. Most of the time he doesn't succeed. But there is always the driving force is the element of revolt. Is not the idea of progress. It's either refusal or revolt. And much later than through Jean-Claude Carrière and Peter Brook, I discovered the Mahabharata, and you find the multitude of forces at work. So it's not just the class struggle. That is a very limited way of looking at civilization. It's these numerous heroes, and we come back to my idea of mutation and evolution, but it is never clear, and it can never end. There can be no end to it. There can no be the idea of we live happily ever after under the communist ideal society. No, because human nature doesn't change, and therefore it will always be open end. And right now, I for the first time, I feel there might be an ending, but a very bad one because of climate change. I have a feeling we may lose the race against the destruction of the planet. That's what I'm most afraid of now.
No. To conclude our conversation, before that, anything you wish to tell for our audience, for me, for all of them, regarding your filmmaking or regarding your wish? So,
well, you see, I'm very honored you go back to our origins and we talk about filmmaking. And I enjoy the conversation because I have the feeling I'm back to the old days where I knew what's going on, or I thought I knew. Whereas in daily life today, let's say in the last 2 decades, I really don't know where we are going and what are the driving forces and what's going on, and especially what's going on in films. There is no art house cinemas anymore. There is no this idea to watch a film together with an audience, and the audience is reacting, and this whole communal experience doesn't exist anymore. Everybody is on his own with his phone, and even the viewing of films is reduced to a very solitary experience. And I don't know if I would even become a filmmaker today, because I always thought that filmmaking is a wonderful mean to reach out to a multitude of people, but of people whom you manage to unite. Well, maybe it happens in the digital area, but I don't know. I'm lost there. I think if I had one wish for film schools and young filmmakers and everybody, is always go back to the origins, you know. What was film like in the days of silent filmmaking? That was the essence of it, and that we must never lose.
Yes.